Welcome to California Highways Route by Route. This podcast explores everything about the numbered highways in California, from Route 1 along the coast to US 395 along the Sierras, from Route 8 in the south to, what did we say it was, Route 161 in the north?
Yes.
Okay, the one that goes right along the Oregon state border.
Brought to you by the California Highways webpage and Gribble Nation.
I'm Daniel Fagan. I do the California Highways webpage at www.cahighways.org.
I'm Tom Fear. I'm one of 4 admins on gribblnation.org. I'm typically the one writing about California and most of the American Southwest.
This is episode 3.07, I-5, the Central Valley. And unlike our last couple of episodes, this one only has one part.
So far on California Highways Route by Route, in this first season, we laid out the background for our highway discussions, which we talked about the history of the system, which serves to explain the eras of state highways and what we mean when we talk about things like legislative route numbers. The numbering approach to state highways, which explains how the route numbers were chosen and why, the names of the state highways and how they were chosen, the organizations involved in the state highway system. Starting with Season 2, we've been exploring state highways route by route in post-mile order. Season 2 covered Route 1 and Route 2, and so far in Season 3, we've covered Route 3, Route 4, and portions of I-5 from the Mexican border to the I-5 Route 99 split at Wheeler Ridge. Each route we've explored the history of the routes, the legislative routes with the number, the pre-1964 sign routes, and the post-1964 routes, the history within the various cities, the plan for freeway routings, the names used for the highways, the plans and projects along those highway corridors. If you want to catch up on any past episode, we encourage you to go to our Spotify for Podcasters home at anchor.fm/CA Route by Route or our forever home at caroutebyroute.org and listen to the back episodes. We also encourage you to like, favorite, and bookmark and share the podcast with your friends. Word of mouth, especially in historic communities, road communities, I've noticed tends to get people to listen.
In this episode, we continue looking at I-5, which is essentially the spine of the state, an interstate running from the Mexican border to the Oregon border. We're covering the route in 6 segments: San Diego to Los Angeles, which we've done; the Ridge Route, basically downtown Los Angeles to the I-5 Route 99 split, which we just did; the Central Valley, I-5W, the former US 99W segments, and the Gateway to Oregon. This episode is focusing on the 3rd segment, from the I-5 Route 99 split near Wheeler Ridge, which is at the bottom of the Grapevine, to Sacramento, which encompasses what is called the Westside Freeway. We'll do our usual exploration covering interesting history along the route, stories behind some of the names on the route, and interesting projects proposed for the route. As a reminder, the pre-1964 legislative Route 5 had 4 segments. Segment 1, from Route 1, Legislative Route 56 to US 101, Legislative Route 68 near Story Road, was Sign Route 13 for 1 year, then Sign Route 17, and now is both Route 17 from Santa Cruz to San Jose and I-880 in San Jose. Segment 2, from US 101, Legislative Route 68 near San Jose, to US 99, Legislative Route 4 near Stockton via Hayward, is more complicated. Between US 101 and Warm Springs, this was Sign Route 21. Between Milpitas and Warm Springs, it was co-signed as Sign Route 9. That segment is present-day I-680. It appears there were plans for this to be Route 17. See my write-up on Route 680 for details, but the two later swapped. Warm Springs is where the spur from Sign Route 17, Legislative Route 69, joined the route. And that spur at one point even was US 101E, if I'm remembering correctly. Between Warm Springs, which is present-day Route 262, that little tiny road between the two highways, in Irvington, near Mission San Jose, which is present-day Route 238, Legislative Route 5 was signed as Sign Route 9 and Sign Route 21, and that's part of present-day I-680. Between Irvington, which is where Route 238 is today, and Hayward, which is former US 58, today's 580, Legislative Route 5 continued as Sign Route 9 and is present-day Route 238. Okay. In fact, I think much of that segment may have even been relinquished by now. I know part of it in Hayward was. Between Hayward and Stockton, Legislative Route 5 was signed as US 50 into Stockton. This was considered as I-5W, this segment really wasn't signed as I-5W and is now I-580, Interstate 205, Business Route 205, and I-5 between Tracy and Stockton. In Stockton, Legislative Route 5, US 50, ran co-signed with Sign Route 4 from Center Street, El Dorado Street to Wilson Way, where it met Legislative Route 4. After Legislative Route 4 was relocated to the new freeway routing, Legislative Route 5 continued to Mariposa Road, where Sign Route 4 and US 99 split off as Legislative Route 75. Sign Route 4 then continued along Farmington Road. Within Stockton, Legislative Route 5, US 50, continued along Charter Way to Main Street, and Legislative Route 4, US 99, as bypass US 50. There were two additional segments of Legislative Route 5, Legislative Route 68, Sign Route 17, now I-880 near Oakland, to the route described in the previous segment near Hayward. That was signed as US 50 between Oakland and Hayward. That segment was briefly signed as I-5W and is today's I-580. Segment 4, Legislative Route 4 near Stockton to Legislative Route 65 near Malukalini Hill, that was Sign Route 8, is current Sign Route 26. It was extended to West Point in 1963 and is more properly a modification to post-1964 Route 26, that extension there.
Sign Route 5 was signed along the route from LRN 5. This was originally Sign Route 13 for 1 year and then became Sign Route 17 near Glenwood to junction Sign Route 1 at San Francisco along Skyline Boulevard. This was Legislative Route 55. This was renumbered on July 1st, 1964 as Route 35, although parts of the original Sign Route 5 alignment follow the current alignment of Route 280. Before Route 280 was constructed, Sign Route 5 began at the intersection of Sign Route 9, Legislative Route 42, and Skyline and proceeded up to the junction of Route 92, this was Legislative Route 105, and then went over to Crystal Springs Reservoir, and then turned north, following the existing portion of Route 280 from the Route 92 I-280 interchange north until where it met Skyline Boulevard and exits to the left.
So this brings us to 1964, when what we know as I-5 was created. In 1964, Route 5 was defined as Route 5 is from the international boundary near Tijuana to the Oregon state line via National City, San Diego, Los Angeles, a point on Route 99 south of Bakersfield, the westerly side of the San Joaquin Valley, and via Wairika, also passing near Santa Ana, Norwalk, Elysian Park in Los Angeles, Glendale, Woodland, and Red Bluff. That portion between Route 99 south of Bakersfield and Route 113 near Woodland may include all or portions of existing state highway routes or routes. That was simplified in 1984 to basically be from the international border near Tijuana to the Oregon state line, via National City, San Diego, Los Angeles, the westerly side of the San Joaquin Valley, Sacramento, and Wairika, also passing near Santa Ana, Glendale, Woodland, and Red Bluff. As we noted, we're breaking this into 6 segments for discussion. We've already talked about the old US 101 segment from Mexico and San Diego to downtown Los Angeles. We've talked about the former US 99 segment to Wheeler Ridge, which is from downtown Los Angeles to Wheeler Ridge, and that covered the Ridge Route and the Newhall Pass and the segments through Glendale and Burbank. This episode, we're talking about the segment from Wheeler Ridge to Sacramento, focusing on I-5 in the San Joaquin Valley, the westerly routing, and US 50. The remaining episodes on I-5 will cover this proposal for I-5W, which covered parts of what is now I-580, I-80, and I-505. The segments from Sacramento to Red Bluff, including Route 16 and the former US 99W segments. And then lastly, the segment from Red Bluff to Oregon.
Legislative route numbers tend to be complicated. The legislative routes for I-5 are all over the place, basically. The routing replaced many historic legislative routes that corresponded to U.S. routes that were bypassed for the interstate. For example, US 101, Legislative Route 2, US 99, Legislative Route 3, US 99 again, this time on Legislative Route 4, US 50 on Legislative Route 5, US 99 on Legislative Route 6, US 99 West on Legislative Route 7. But often the freeway was on a new or bypass routing, so basically it wasn't often replacing existing lanes of travel. It was built next to it. A number of legislative route numbers were created specifically for freeway routings. The segment we are talking about today is Legislative Route 238. Note that we're not going into detail on the original U.S. route source alignments or really the surface street routings that were bypassed, as will be covered in future episodes.
So, as Tom noted, the primary LRN for this segment was LRN 238, with north of Stockton dealing with LRN 5. We've already mentioned the history of LRN 5. So where was LRN 4 in all of this? Okay, right? We came out going down the grapevine on LRN 4. Well, LRN 4 was US 99 still, and it was US 50 for a bit north of Stockton, and was the older alignment. I-5 was generally on a new alignment in this portion of the San Joaquin Valley. So LRN 238 was the primary legislative route corresponding to I-5, and it was defined as to extend from a point on Legislative Route 4, US 99, south of Bakersfield, to a point on Legislative Route 7, US 99W, now Route 113 near Woodland. Okay, we'll talk about LRN 7 in the last episode of the season when we talk about all things Route 7. Okay, but it was the old US 99W in that portion. On a route on the westerly side of the San Joaquin Valley to be selected by the California Highway Commission, which route may include all or portions of existing state highway routes or routes. And so you'll see that as we do this, portions of this were subsumed on things that were US 50 and even more so when we go to the Sacramento area. But the Sacramento area was less 238. That last part is interesting. I-5 includes a portion of LRN 5, specifically the portion of US 50 from Tracy to Stockton, which is now the portion from I-205 to Route 4.
Historical routings. Generally, I-5 was new freeway along new routings in the segments. Most towns along the way are new or came with the freeway, or small communities. So like Harris Ranch, for example, really was just a cattle ranch. It didn't really cater to travelers until I-5 was built. There's a few, but not many. We'll start with how the Westside Freeway came to be. We'll explore the historic routings in the following areas: Manteca and French Camp, Stockton, South Sacramento, and Sacramento.
Since we mentioned Harris Ranch, before we talk about the Westside Freeway, I have a vague recollection that there was a state highway that was planned for that area that would have connected to where Harris Ranch was. But what's going through my head, wasn't that like going to be the end terminus of one of the Sierra routes?
Yeah, 145.
Yeah, I was going to say I was remembering something because I thought I saw that. It was either when I was writing the US 6 stuff or when I was looking into the Legislative Route 7 stuff and going down one of the rabbit holes there.
The legislative route at 145, the extension ended up being is eluding me, but I remember reading the California Highways and Public Works article, and I don't remember if they referenced Harris Ranch specifically, but they noted it was a high-traffic local corridor in Fresno County that actually had a lot of agricultural and ranching purposes. And where 145 ends today is actually right in front of the actual ranching part of Harris Ranch, the big, stinky cattle range that most people, if they're traveling on I-5 north, tend to get a nice whiff of if they're in the area.
Yeah, but never extended all the way to where the Harris Ranch stop is now.
Correct. That's on 198.
Is it on 198?
It is.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. As I said, I had a vague recollection of that being some highway that wasn't constructed.
Yeah, the Harris Ranch is kind of an interesting place. They got a lot of really decent restaurants there, but the thing that they put in lately that was kind of amusing for a bit, and I don't know, I don't think it's on the power grid still. They have a bunch of Tesla charging stations that were actually run off diesel generators, like very, very large, like industrial ones. So even today, it's still kind of a really remote area.
Yeah. Most of the West Side Freeway is remote. So let's talk about where this came from. The planning for this Westside Highway started in 1925, but it wasn't until 1950 that the investigation of a potential toll road in that area that the original planning was taken seriously. The toll road, of course, wasn't feasible. Wouldn't have had enough traffic, or I don't think they thought of it at the time. But the routing was, and that led to the addition of Legislative Route 258 in 1957. And remember, we said there wasn't a lot of traffic. Back then, they didn't know how much traffic there would be. They were looking at the traffic on US 99. It was anticipated that when the West Side Freeway was completed, it would afford a substantial distance and travel savings to through traffic. For travel between the San Francisco-Oakland metropolitan area and Southern California, it would save approximately 20 miles over using US 50 and US 99. And when compared to the use of US 101, it would save 43 miles. Between Los Angeles and Sacramento, the driving distance would be reduced 6 miles over the present US 99. The distance savings to through traffic that would be afforded by the West Side Freeway, combined with the rural character of the route, would encourage its use by heavy through trucking. Studies indicated that approximately 25% of the traffic on this route would be trucks, with 60% having 5 axles. And we look at this now and we go, oh, we're saving 20 miles, we're saving 6 miles. That's not all that much. But remember, back then, you did not have cars that were typically going 60 miles an hour. So the time that took was significant, the time savings. Additionally, although interstates were designed to connect population centers over 50,000 people, in the mid-1950s, the only valley cities that reached that population were Bakersfield, Fresno, and Stockton. Modesto was only 35,000 people. They were served adequately by the existing Route 99 Expressway, the US 99 Expressway, which by the 50s had pretty much all been converted to expressway. Now, the routing they chose for the West Side Highway was dictated by a number of factors, including geography, the location of the California aqueduct, power, oil lines, and irrigation concerns and subsidence. In other words, the ground there is very marshy, and they had to put it along a route that wouldn't sink on them. And contrast this, and Tom will be able to tell you this even more, with the US 99 routing, which was generally along the railroad tracks.
The West Side Freeway and Interstate 5 West. North of Tracy, the plans interacted with the proposed Interstate 5E and Interstate 5W, so east and west. In the 1947 version of the interstate highway system, which we didn't get, I-5 would have gone up Route 99 to Modesto and split with I-5E continuing along US 99, and I-5 West would follow what is modern Route 132 west to I-580. Modern Route I-580 west to I-80, modern Route I-80 east to I-505, and modern Route I-505 to I-5. In 1957, the West Side alignment was defined as Legislative Route 238, and Interstate 5 West would have split at the Route 132 I-580 interchange with I-5E on the alignment north to Sacramento. I-5 West would have been a massive multiplex with Interstate 80, which went against the whole number one route rule that was kind of the whole premise of the 1964 state highway renumbering, or a large part of it anyways. More detail about I-5 West is what we plan to talk about in the next episode.
One of the things to note about this, though, is the original planning would have had it on that I-580, I'm going to say, I can't remember the name, the angular line of the triangle you have there. And that when they went to the I-5W routing, they actually went to a routing that ended up using what became I-205.
Yeah, and kind of interesting tidbit that's kind of a popular point of discussion on my page right now is the recent Super 2 freeway, that 132, the one segment of 132 that opened in Modesto. That is actually a vestige of that 1947 concept for I-5 West. So it kind of got a little weird west of there, and it didn't really stabilize, I don't think really until the late 1960s when they adopted at least the 132 part of it. That kind of came like after the interstate corridors were solidified, the planning of them.
Now, this whole West Side Freeway took a long time to construct. They started in 1967 when they completed it between Route 152 north to the split with I-580. In 1969, they did a portion south of Route 46. In 1970, they did between Route 119 north to Route 46 and north of Route 41 to the county line. In 1975, they did the segment from Wheeler Ridge to Stockton and from Route 160 to I-505. In 1977, they did the segment from Stockton to Route 12. And in 1979, they did the segment from Stockton to north of Sacramento, which completed the freeway. And I don't know, as they were building this in pieces, how much those pieces were used because they were sort of separated from everything else. I'm sure most of the traffic was just still staying on Route 99 at that point. And I'll note that's one of the reasons, the length of time that they took to do this, that so many signs in Los Angeles for things like I-405 and I-5 gave the control city as Bakersfield because it just was not completed until the late 70s that it went to Sacramento. It was still, you had to go up to Bakersfield. Now, the delay in completion between Stockton and Sacramento was due to the ground conditions. The ground there was really unstable, and the routing essentially lied along the eastern fringe of the Sacramento River Delta. They would grade the highway, and then hours after it was completed, it would sink. And that was really common. There was a lot of fill involved, often with rocks and riprap that were trucked in from other projects. One section between Route 12 and San Joaquin County Route E13, the western non-state extension of Route 104 west from the Galt area, was a real problem. They built twin bridges over the Moacalumi River. I think I got that right. At that point, which was practically a bayou. And every time they tried to build the embankment approaches, because there were levees on both sides of the river, it would sag almost immediately because the water-saturated ground upon which they were building wouldn't support the weight. Eventually, they had to resort to pumping as much water out as they could, replacing it with a fill composition more resistant to saturation. Pretty much every technique used along that route was trial and error. Neither Caltrans nor their various contractors had encountered anything like that previously. We drive upon it now and we don't even think about all the troubles it took to build this route. We thought, oh, this is a route through the middle of nowhere. Now, this route took a lot of work to build.
So moving on to Manteca and French Camp. The Manteca, Lathrop, and French Camp area is interesting because this is where US 50, what was previously Legislative Route 5, now Business I-205, entered from Tracy along 11th Street. US Route 50 then went across Manthey Road, Harlan Road, and El Dorado Road until it met Charter Way, Sign Route 4 in Stockton, where it cut across to US 99. For a brief time, US 50 in this section was also US 99 West. I don't remember the exact timing off the top of my head, but this involves the truncation to US 48 and gradual replacement with US 50. So there's a little bunch of screwy changes to the U.S. routes in the late 20s, early 1930s that ended up resulting in U.S. 50 in the French Camp area specifically. The I-5 routing was generally on a new alignment, although some segments appeared to have been built on top of Manthey Road and Harlan Road at the I-205 I-5 transition. Note that both Legislative Route 238 and Legislative Route 5 coexisted in this area, but is likely LRN 238 subsumed and replaced the LRN 5 routing.
This now brings us to Stockton, and in Stockton, we've already talked a bit about the routing when we talked about Sign Route 4. In Stockton, Legislative Route 5 entered on El Dorado Road as US 50. It crossed along Charter Way, co-signed with Sign Route 4 to US 99. US 99 originally entered on Mariposa Road with Sign Route 4, crossed Charter, and exited to the north along Wilson. During this time, US 50 was co-signed along Wilson. When the freeway routing of US 99 was constructed, US 50 bypass continued across Charter to meet bypass US 99 near Main. Eventually, all these surface streets alignments were dropped, and the bypass became the main line. US 50 then continued co-signed with US 99 up Legislative Route 4 to Sacramento. Between 1972 and 1981, Route 99 also carried temporary I-5 shields. These were smaller 24 by 24 shields, generally posted on the Route 99 reassurance assemblies below the Route 99 shield. From top to bottom, these assemblies read, north or south, California Route 99, temporary I-5. So, northbound, the temporary I-5 signage began at the I-5 Route 4 Charterway exit in Stockton, extended east on Charterway, Old US 50, and east of the Route 4 divergence, unsigned Route 26, to Route 99. Then north on Route 99 to then Interstate 80, which is now Business Route 80, and US 50. After I-5 was completed southward into Sacramento by 1976, the temporary signage ceased and to I-5 appeared on the interchange's big green signs, as it does today, in order to direct traffic to the new I-5 alignment. Prior to that time, temporary I-5 signage followed the I-80 freeway to northbound Route 113 near Davis. Remember our discussion, that's Old US 99W, which received signage as temporary I-5. It then followed the Old US 99W alignment on Route 113, turning west onto then Route 16 at Woodland and following it to a point west of town where US 99 West had historically turned north. It then followed the Old US 99W routing, which was gradually being bypassed by the I-5 construction. The entire Sacramento to Redding portion of I-5 was completed by 1976, at which time the temporary I-5 signage was removed from I-80 west of the I-5 junction, as well as to the north. Looking at southbound before 1976, the temporary I-5 signage began near Woodland, again using Route 113 south to I-80 and I-80 east to Route 99 at the present Business Route 80 US 50 Route 99 interchange south of downtown Sacramento. Southbound Route 99 big green signage on eastbound I-80 had temporary I-5 signage attached in order to expedite through traffic heading for the continuation of I-5 in Stockton. Post-1976, the southbound I-5 ramp to eastbound I-80 South Route 99 was also marked as temporary I-5. While it's unclear whether East I-80 ever received temporary I-5 reassurance signage, the ramp to South Route 99 was definitely also signed temporary I-5. Southbound Route 99 temporary I-5 signage mirrored the northbound. Temporary I-5 exited at Charterway, continued west to the newly constructed I-5 alignment. I-5 itself was built as far north as Hammer Lane in the north reaches of Stockton by 1974. Northbound I-5 traffic was instructed to exit at Charterway. The stub end of I-5 was signed as local traffic only. The southbound sub end of I-5 in Sacramento, extending down to Pocket Road, was likewise signed. The final segment of I-5 between Stockton and Sacramento was completed in early 1981, at which time all of this temporary signage southbound along Route 99 and the approach routes was removed.
Moving on to South Sacramento. In the 1940s, US 50 entered Sacramento-Stockton Boulevard, turning left at 5th Avenue, right onto Sacramento Boulevard, left onto Broadway, right onto 16th Street, and left on M Street / Folsom Boulevard, cosigned with Route 16 into Perkins. In 1960, the South Sacramento Freeway, which is current Route 99, although it was cosigned with US 50 until the 1970s, was constructed to the south of Broadway and 29th Street. At the junction of Broadway and 29th, near the current interchange of Route 51, US 50, and Route 99, US 99 West and US 99E began. US 99 West followed Broadway and couplet at 15th and 16th on the old routing of US 50, US 99 into downtown. This would later become Route 160, but was never Route 24 or US 40 in this portion. US Route 99E, however, was cosigned with US 50 north via 29th and 30th to Folsom Boulevard, where US 50 then made a right-hand turn going eastbound with Route 16 to Perkins. The original US 99 routing followed Stockton Boulevard into town, Broadway to 16th Street, 16th north to L Street, and L/M Streets west out of town, cosigned with US Route 40.
Now we get to Sacramento. In 1933, the US 99W designation was created, and this route became US 99W. In West Sacramento, the routing first used the M Street Bridge, then I Street, then the Tower Bridge, which is still Route 275, just the bridge itself. In Sacramento, before the route was completed in the late 1960s, it appears that I-5 slid off of Route 99 and ran west along Broadway, and then continued west, cosigned with the West Sacramento Freeway, then signed as I-80/I-5, which is now Business Route 80, unsigned Route 50. While the West Side Freeway portion was being completed around 1975, I-5 had a temporary routing that entered the Sacramento area via Route 99, the South Sacramento Freeway, then followed Route 99 westbound on the WX Freeway past the Oak Park interchange, co-signed with I-80, before merging with the constructed portion of the West Side Freeway, but still co-routed with Route 99. And just because out of curiosity, so folks know, this is also the area where you have something that is designated as Federal Aid Interstate 305 that has never been signed as I-305 on the old US 50 portion of the freeway between, I think it's between I-80 and where it basically meets 99. That segment of US 50 is actually technically Interstate 305.
It's actually classified as chargeable interstate still. That's the difference with I-80.
Yeah, most people don't realize that.
In Davis, US 99 and US 40 entered via Current Olive Drive, Richards Boulevard, going under the railroad tracks under the Richards Subway, First Street, B Street, and Russell Boulevard, splitting at the current Route 113 Russell Boulevard junction. From there, US 99 continued north up on Route 113 to Main Street in Woodland, then west on Main Street to County Road 98 and County Road 98 north to current County Road 99W near the town of Yolo. So 99W, if you're ever in that area, see that County Road number, that's a vestige of US 99 West. This was signed as temporary I-5 until the I-5 freeway was actually constructed.
Before we talk about projects, a few notes in this area. You'll note we did not really talk that much about I-5 pretty much south of Manteca. And that's because that's really all a new alignment. Anything you saw, there's new cities, all the stops you see in that area near Route 58, Harris Ranch, all of that is new. That was all built post-64. I don't think any of those little towns or stops were there before then. The other thing to note is this routing is really convoluted through Sacramento, as you saw from when we talked about it. And the other thing I was going to point out is where we talked about Russell Road and Route 113 in Davis. There was also planned to be an extension, and I'm going to remember the route number. I think that was a portion of Route 128, I think, that was never built. I may have the route number wrong. That I was looking at as I was dealing with legislative Route 6 and 7 in that area extending over from now. But they built it, the routing as far as I-505, but that segment between I-505 and Route 113 was not constructed. And there's a county road in that area just because they never desired to upgrade it. That your recollection, Tom?
Yes, that's Plan 128.
So now we're going to talk about some projects along this segment of the route. There are two major projects in the Stockton area. The Stockton Aux Lanes project, which may have just finished. I haven't driven through there recently to check. And the Stockton Viaduct improvements, which are just getting started.
So the Stockton Auxiliary Lanes, in January 2011, the CTC approved for future consideration of funding a project in San Joaquin County that will construct HOV lanes, auxiliary lanes, traffic operation systems, sound walls, and rehabilitate the pavement. Phase 1 was from 8th Street undercrossing at post mile 25 to Hammer Lane undercrossing at post mile 32.9. It would start construction in fiscal year 2010. In 2012, funding was approved for I-5 from Charterway to Country Club Boulevard to rehabilitate roadway, including reconstruction of the existing 8-lane of freeway, widening inside shoulders, reconstructing outside shoulders and auxiliary lanes. There was also plans to add an auxiliary lane from the Monte Diablo on-ramp to the Country Club off-ramp northbound. According to the March 2009 draft environmental impact report, the proposed project would construct 2 additional lanes on Route 5, one in each direction between Country Club Boulevard and 8 Mile Road. Modify 2 existing interchanges, Hammer Lane and 8 Mile Road, and construct 2 interchanges, Auto Drive and Gateway Boulevard. This would have final completion in fiscal year 2020.
Have you driven that at all? Do you know whether those are done?
To be honest, off the top of my head, I am usually so bored of I-5 at that point, I really haven't paid too much attention.
In terms of new stuff on I-5 near Stockton, in December 2015, the CTC approved SHOP funding for bridge rehabilitation at the Stockton Channel Viaduct, Bridge 290171 left and right, to address structural and load-carrying capacity deficiencies. By August 2021, this had morphed into the CTC approving future consideration of funding for a larger project, the Stockton Channel Viaduct Bridge improvements, which would replace the northbound and southbound Stockton Channel Viaduct bridges on I-5 in San Joaquin County. In May 2024, it was reported that this project was on schedule to begin construction in 2026 and will represent the largest project investment in Caltrans District 10 history at nearly $1 billion. It's expected to be completed in 2031. It is currently in the final planning and design stages, with construction expected to begin in 2 years from 2024, so 2026. I would expect with this project, with the ways described, is they're going to route traffic from one bridge to the other, replace a bridge, and then route it onto the other bridge. So this is going to be an interesting project.
Continuing with projects, the South Sacramento HOV lanes. In 2002, plans started for the HOV lanes between I-80 and Pocket Road. In May 2013, work started on the environmental impact report for the project that would have added a bus/carpool lanes from I-5 1 mile south to Elk Grove Boulevard to US Route 50. In October 2013, the CTC considered for future approval of funding a project that would construct HOV lanes and sound walls in both directions from US 50 to Morrison Creek. There were multiple phases due to lack of funds. Phase 1, US 50 to Morrison Creek, is funded through plans, specifications, and estimate with federal dollars. Phase 2 will construct HOV lanes from Morrison Creek south of Stone Lake Creek, but wasn't funded. In July 2019, it was reported that Caltrans was announcing the start of a massive several-year-long $370 million reconstruction project. This would include replacing the old road surface. The project would take 3 years and involve extensive lane closures, at times prompting traffic congestion and detours. Officials announced that, and they were absolutely correct, because that was horrible. Hated driving through that. Project finish date was set back for late 2022. The project will include the addition of a carpool or high occupancy vehicle lanes in both directions south of downtown. There was also discussion to turn some of these lanes into managed or hot lanes.
And that's one of the reasons why I included this project in the discussion. I think much of it is completed, but they're still working on we're going to make these managed lanes. I think that's the trend you're seeing everywhere, is now these managed lanes are going in. Next, we come to the bridges over the American River. In March 2018, it was reported that Caltrans was exploring what could be the biggest Sacramento freeway redo in modern times, tearing down and replacing the twin freeway bridges that carry I-5 over the American River. This was included in the 2020 SHOP, with construction planned to start in 2022. The funding was approved in 2022. I'm not sure whether this has started yet. And I think there are also plans, if I remember correctly, to replace the bridges over the American River on Route 51, Business Route 80, on the other side of Sacramento. So we're going to have a lot of construction in the Sacramento area.
The Metro Air Parkway. There are plans to add a new freeway interconnection and interchange at Metro Air Parkway. The Metro Air Park I-5 interchange will provide a primary entrance egress to the Metro Air Park Special Planning Area. So this is what they would call an SPA, an industrial business park. Construction funding was allocated in 2020.
And if I remember correctly, that whole area on the south side of the Sacramento airport is about where planned Route 102 would have gone. It was never constructed.
Correct.
There are a number of other projects going on. I mean, I-5 is a major corridor. The ones I talked about were just the big ones. They're also planning to replace the Toomey Gulch Bridge, improve the Sperry Road interchange, widening the Mossdale Y interchange with I-205 to add HV lanes. That's really in the early planning stages. Updating the Cozumel River Boulevard Interchange, I probably butchered that name, and constructing acceleration and deceleration lanes near the Sacramento airport.
So as far as naming conventions, broadly, this is the Westside Highway, although the name is not widely used or really not widely known outside of highway road fandoms. There are 4 CHP memorial names, one police officer name. Here are some of the more interesting ones.
And I'll note, there's no really broad name for this highway in this area. I don't think they call it Golden State Freeway. I don't think they actually use a name for it other than I-5. Do you recall that there's a whole name for the stretch?
I just call it the boring stretch of I-5. Most people know what you're talking about if you refer to it like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about some names that are actually not really used, but they are assigned. The interchange of I-5 and US 50 in Sacramento County is named the California State Engineer Memorial Interchange. It was named in tribute to past, present, and future state engineers, worried about the memorial there, and related professionals, and in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Professional Engineers in California Government Group. California state engineers and related professionals have paid a high price in serving our state, with at least 37 on-the-job deaths in their ranks over the last century. These engineers design and inspect the state highways and bridges, ensure that schools and hospitals are safe during earthquakes, improve air and water quality, work to reduce fossil fuel emissions, and perform countless other professional functions that create jobs and protect public safety, and it was named in 2012.
I-5 between Q Street and J Street, Sacramento, is named the Deputy Sheriff Sandra Powell Larson Memorial Highway. It was named in memory of Sacramento County Deputy Sheriff Sandra Powell Larson, who died in the line of duty at the age of 48 while transporting state prisoners on northbound I-5 south of R Street in Sacramento. Deputy Sheriff Powell Larson graduated from the Rio Linda High School in 1968 and began her career with the Sacramento County Department of Social Services. She continued in her county career with the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, where she became a Sacramento County Reserve Deputy Sheriff. Deputy Sheriff Parson Lau became a full-time Sacramento County Deputy Sheriff on September 30th, 1974, while continuing her secondary education at Sacramento City College, where she received an Associate of Arts degree in criminal justice. Deputy Sheriff Powell Larson was the first female officer to die in the line of duty in over 150-year history of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, named by Senate Concurrent Resolution 96, Resolution Chapter 113, on August 18, 2006.
And I'll bet this came from the naming resolution. She was probably the first officer to die in the line of duty, because they probably started admitting female officers, unfortunately, a lot later in the history of the Sheriff's Office. Now, I-5 from Stockton to Sacramento is officially named the Carlton E. Forbes Freeway. Forbes was the chief engineer of the California Department of Transportation from 1974 until he retired in 1980, and it was named in 1982.
Next time on California Highways Route by Route, we continue our exploration of Route 5, looking at the short-lived Interstate 5 West routing.
For more information, visit the pages on I-5, US 99, Legislative Route 4, Legislative Route 238, over on cahighways.org. We'll put links of them in the show notes. Tom has some Gribble Nation blogs in the area, in particular a whole blog on the Westside Freeway and on the highways in and around Old Sacramento.
As always, information on our episodes is available on our website, caroutebyroute.org, where you can leave us comments on our podcasts. Spotify has added a comment feature, so you may be able to comment there also. The episode is available on our Spotify for Podcasters home, https://podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/ca route by route /. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on your podcaster choice. It really does help people find us. Remember that after the credits, we have a bit of free-form discussion on the topic of the episode, and I definitely have some thoughts today. Join us as we continue to explore California highways route by route.
This episode was written by Daniel Fagan and Tom Beer, edited and produced by Daniel Fagan. Our opening theme is I'd Like to Be by the Seaside by John H. Leverkind. And if you have an opening theme that would be free for us to use, please let me know. Episodes are recorded using freeconferencecall.com, and this podcast is a product of California Highways at cahighways.org and GribbleNation at gribblnation.org. I sort of hesitate to ask, given that introduction, Tom, what are your thoughts on the whole West Side bypass and I-5 through downtown Sacramento?
So this whole segment of freeway from Wheeler Ridge to, I'd say, around Red Bluff, honestly is probably the most boring segment of interstate on the West Coast. There are only a few segments of interstate in general I can think of that are more of a snooze fest. Now, I'm not saying it's not handy, but oh my God, like if you're on a long distance trip, break it up, take 99. Like if you're heading out of LA and you're going to Sacramento, do yourself a favor, do not make the mistake of taking I-5, take 99. It'll cost you 10 minutes, but you'll see so much more, and you'll be kept entertained.
You think it's more boring than I-15 or I-40 across the desert?
Well, I like the desert environment, to be quite honest. Like, you get to see some, like, really neat geology as far as, if, like, you're into that kind of thing. Like, you can definitely identify volcanic peaks. You can see desert lowlands where there's, like, sinks and dry lakes. Like, with I-5, like, you're just looking at, like, a bunch of agricultural stuff. Like, in California Aqueduct, like, they have a couple, like, scenic vistas on the segment between 198 and 152. I think a little bit, some more north than that, actually, even. That's really it. So it's like, you're just looking at farmland, and just, for me, that's not exciting. And I would imagine for a lot of people, it's pretty bland.
That's because you live in Clovis and Fresno, and all that's around you is farmland.
Well, true.
I mean,
the most I could think of, too, was farmland.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, US 99 has a more historical interest and I-5 is faster. But I always remember that segment of I-5 for one, and you don't see this as much anymore, unfortunately. The farm associations used to post signs on the fences of what was being grown. And I always found that interesting. I want to say there are some segments here where they have the large wooden people working as signs in the area.
Not anymore. Just on 101.
Oh, that's all on 101. But they still have the signs of what's being grown, because I remember seeing grapes and raisins and stuff like that.
That stuff's gone, too.
Oh, is that all gone now, too?
It's all farmers doing political things now.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of your signs right now are usually farmers. I'm not going to say farmers. I'm going to say farm associations pontificating about water.
Yes. The more dams, no trains, or whatever derivative that is the very popular sign that you see frequently on I-5. And like a lot of the corridors in the western side of San Joaquin Valley, 33, 41, 198, it's all the same sign.
Yeah, it is. And as we are recording this, we are at hopefully the end of the Palisades fire down here in Southern California. And I got into a whole batch of discussions because one of the blame game, I'm going to say, posts going around has been on the whole subject of the Resnicks and the Kern Water Bank. And they're saying that the Resnicks were somehow responsible for the lack of water in hydrants in the city of Los Angeles. And I hear that and I go, no. LA gets its water through the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the California Water Project, and the Colorado River Aqueduct, which means that, first of all, only a percentage would come from the California Water Project. And the California Water Project only gets a small percentage from the Kern Water Bank, which doesn't always put water into the water project. So on the surface, it does not make sense. I don't know. But the mention of these water signs, I'm sure, made me think of the Resnicks and all of that mess. Are you familiar with that controversy, Tom?
No, but like around me, the thing with the agriculture interests is they want more reservoirs dedicated towards storage of water for agriculture purposes. So, like, one that's big around my area, or at least was until recently, was the whole proposed Temperance Flat Dam above Millerton Lake, which would have, I believe, replaced Kerchak Lake. So, I don't know. I'm no expert on reservoirs and hydrology, but to me, it seems like we're pretty stocked up as far as most of our rivers are pretty managed out here, like the Kings River, San Juan Key River, and even down in the Kauai, Tule, in even Kern. I don't know how you get more water simply by putting more reservoirs up.
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense.
Dams do not create more water, and if you're interested in this area at all, I will highly recommend the book Cadillac Desert. I will put a link into it in there. It talks about water systems in the West, including the LA Aqueduct and the California Aqueduct. About the only thing it really does not address well is the whole Hetch Hetchy and water systems for San Francisco, which is another mess of an area that I don't think has been really well discussed. Moving north, what do you think about I-5 in the South Sacramento and through Sacramento area?
It's starting to get overrun because Stockton and Sacramento are really growing together. So the improvements that we discussed today are really at this point necessary. And you can see a vestige of kind of I-5 was really a rural corridor when it was constructed. You have that whole segment, I believe it's north of 12, where it bottlenecks down to 4 lanes and created significant traffic congestion. You're often better served going down through as a through route, dipping back over the crosstown freeway back to 99 and taking that into Sacramento and crossing back over to I-5 in downtown.
Now, we didn't mention it in this episode, but it's worth mentioning. There were once plans for an easterly freeway, which would have been, and if you look at state highway maps, would have been Route 65. It was completed just as highway up through Porterville. It then disappears for a while now, and then picks up again up near, Roseville and that area, and continues a little bit further from there.
Yes, Roseville, up towards the vicinity of Marysville.
How much do you think construction of Route 65, had it ever been done, would have changed this area?
It's hard to say. So you have a vestige of this around Porterville with the completed freeway and expressway segments of 65. And in that area, it makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting is that is completely isolated from the rest of the freeway and expressway network as it is constructed. So 65 and 137, they bottleneck back down to 2 lanes. I'd have a hard time believing that there would ever really be a need for a full freeway north of 198 connecting all the way up to Roseville. An expressway corridor, yeah, I could see that being built, but I don't even know if that would necessarily be 4 lanes. So there might be some 2-lane segments. I just don't know if the demand is really there. Now, me living in Fresno, of course, this has been really handy, but necessary, I'm not sure. But in a historic context, it's actually kind of an interesting corridor to look at because it's basically an overlay of the old Stockton-Los Angeles Road, which was in the foothills and avoided a lot of the problems that San Joaquin Valley is known for, was historically known for, like Tule marshes, or even now, like the fog. So that's kind of like the Westside Freeway. The whole purpose of that, most people take it during winter season, is to avoid that Tule fog, because it is a problem on 99, especially if we have a heavy and rainy winter. It is very difficult to drive anywhere on 99 in the early mornings.
And that brings up a mention of something that, at least for now, you can see from I-5 and is impacting I-5 that wasn't always there and then was there, which is Tulare Lake.
Yeah. Last year, you could actually see the lake from I-5. It was really neat to see. It was about 200 feet higher than the lake basin, kind of floating around there in the Kettleman Hills. But, yeah, you talked about land subsiding. That's why I-5 is really high up, is all the stable land is up in those foothills at the Diablo Range and Kettleman Hills. You get into the Tulare Lake Basin, there are some parts that have sunk by 30 to 50 feet, I'm to understand, just from the underground water all drying up over the years because it's all been diverted. So you couldn't really feasibly build a freeway out there, much less like even a settlement. That's why it's all agricultural in that lake basin.
And I don't know the impact of the lake and its growing and shrinking on all the agribusinesses in that area.
Last year, it had an effect on the cotton industry. I find that kind of strange because, like, my understanding about cotton is it's one of the more water-intensive crops. So why would you put it on the bottom of a lake, a dry lake basin? That just seems like an odd choice to me, but I'm not an agricultural expert by any means.
So anything else on this segment of I-5 that you think is worth mentioning?
Chargeable interstate corridors related to US 99 and US 101. One of the most frequent questions I get about the Westside Freeway and I-5 is like, why the hell was this built all the way out here instead of US 99? Well, when you think about it, you mentioned it earlier in the episode. So US 99 at the time was servicing cities that were roughly about 50,000 people tops. But more so, the corridor was funded for freeway and expressway construction solely by the state. It was either built already, the earliest segments were completed in 1953 around Tulare, and it was funded by the time the Interstate Highway in 1956 Federal Highway Aid Act came into existence. This is the emergency interstate system. So why would the Division of Highways and California Highway Commission choose to allocate chargeable interstate mileage to a corridor they've already funded? So think about that. If you're really thinking about it, it doesn't make sense. When you have an entirely brand new corridor that you're going to have the federal government pay for 90% of, it makes total sense when you think about it in that way. The state basically almost got a completely free interstate corridor in the western side of the valley. So it's better to have 3 highways, 101, 5, and 99 going north-south than just 2.
And by doing that, they took the major commerce truck traffic and moved it out of the cities and out of essentially going through downtown Sacramento.
Correct. So most
to the side of Sacramento.
Yeah. So what you see most of 99 between Wheeler Ridge and Sacramento is short haul freight. So it's mainly like local trucks staying within California, only going like a couple 100 miles at most, whereas like the long haul trucks are always on the West Side Freeway.
Yeah, it's sort of a game of dodge truck when you take it, especially in the 2-lane sections.
Yeah, it can get a little frustrating because you get that whole accordion backup where everyone's like driving bumper to bumper thinking they can make the truckers go faster.
Anything else you want to add on this segment?
I think that's it. If you're going to drive it, do it in the winter because at least it's green and you have some pretty mountain ranges to the west. But that would be my advice.
And I think at this point we should address the other question of US 101 or I-5 if you're going from LA to either San Francisco or Sacramento. To me, as someone in Southern California, it really depends on how much time you've got. If you can afford the extra hour or so, I would take 101. If you're going to Sacramento, I tend to prefer 99, but if you want it a little bit faster, take I-5. And I think there are some differences in the calculus as to whether you're going to the South Bay or going to the East Bay. I-5 may be better if you're going to the East Bay, simply because you're going to avoid a lot of traffic in the San Francisco Bay Area.
One I've heard regarding LA to San Jose quite a bit over the years, which I thought is very clever, is 101 to 25 to 198 to 33 to I-5. That is a quiet drive, and it gets you past some of the worst parts of I-5.
I will have to try that one of these days. I've never really explored 25 and 198. So
they are beautiful 2-lane roads, but that's probably a discussion for another time. But they're absolutely scenic and gorgeous.
And with that, I think we will let you go off to your driving, and we will talk to you next time when we will explore what would have been Interstate 5W.